Custom trees are one of the hardest things to master in Minecraft. Even if you've been building them for years, they can still look unrealistic. So, here are 7 easy ways to improve your custom trees to make them look even more realistic. The first tip involves the trunk. Often, when people build custom trees, they pretty much ignore the trunk. Usually, it looks something like this, just a line of blocks with some stairs and fences added to the bottom. However, getting the trunk right is the first step to making a realistic tree. The most important thing is to consider the overall shape of the trunk. I like to start with just solid blocks to get an idea of the overall shape. Then, I add partial blocks to refine the curves and shape of the tree. By doing this, I'm making sure that the details are not random, but picked to improve the shape of the tree. I'll use this tree to demonstrate. In this case, we're using partial blocks at the base to show the tree's roots. This is important when making the base of the tree, especially with larger ones. The trunk doesn't just spread out, it forms distinct roots. So, whenever you're making trees, make sure that the base has defined roots that enter the ground. This idea applies to the whole tree. Make sure the blocks you place imply distinct shapes, like roots or branches, instead of just placing them randomly to add interest. Our second trick is to change how you make the branches. The branches are the backbone of the tree, and getting them right will make adding the leaves so much easier. Most people just build to a certain point, and then build the branches out from there. Instead, we'll use a few tricks to make the branches look like those on a real tree. The first useful trick is that branches split off from a tree at different heights. I like to start a little bit off the ground to make the first branch, but not too far. Then, I make the branches split off at decreasing intervals until the top of the tree. However, there's another interesting fact about trees to consider. This is that when a branch splits off, the width of the trunk before the split and the width of the trunk and branch after the split are roughly equal. In this way, you should think of branches less like arms that split away from the trunk and more like the trunk itself splitting in half. This ties into the next point. Branches should split off at an upwards angle. Like you can see here, the branch is angled upwards, especially at the beginning. Now, it comes closer to being horizontal by the end, but notice that it starts at an angle. Just remember that trees try to reach the light, so by the top of the tree, the branches should reach upward, not sideways. Also, the branches decrease in size farther up the tree, as the width of the trunk decreases and more branches split off from it. Finally, note how I've used partial blocks to refine the shape of the branches and show how they split off from the tree. Now, the third trick involves a common misconception with trees. Most people, when drawing or building trees, make the bark brown. However, real bark is more of a warm gray. While most people make the trunk and branches of a tree out of ordinary logs, I like to use more gray blocks instead. I often blend together a mix of acacia logs, stripped spruce, coarse dirt, and even some dripstone or deep slate iron ore on larger trees. Because all of these colors have roughly the same value, or lightness, they blend together easily, especially on larger trees. By doing this, you get a saturation somewhere between them, which is a desaturated brown or warm gray. If you want to learn more about color mixing, like what I showed now, watch my video up here. But only after you finish this one. Next, we have the leaves. These are arguably the most important part of the tree, as they are the part you really see. However, it is important to get the branches right first, as they will determine the shape of the leaves. Now, many people, when building custom trees, often just make a blob of leaves. However, this is pretty obviously unrealistic. Instead, we're going to use the branches we already laid out and build the leaves off that. But first, we need to make all of the small branches off of the main ones. Just like how we made the branches as part of the trunk that branched off in a different direction, we'll do the same with the small branches. In a way, you can think of the main branch as the trunk and the smaller arms as branches. However, the key thing is to remember that trees grow towards the light. So, branches will never branch downward, as that would place them under other branches. Also, most of the small branches will branch up. On the ideal tree, all of the small branches would be evenly spaced, and the leaves would form a thin, elliptical shape around the trunk. While this would never happen in real life, you should bear this in mind with the small branches. Just make them out of fences and iron bars, and try to get them to branch out forward and up. Now, it's time to add the leaves. When doing this, you need to bear a few things in mind. First, remember that trees are mostly air, so you should only add a thin covering of leaves to the ends of the small branches. Secondly, remember that trees will also face the light. I like to only add leaves to the sides of branches that face out and up, and not to place any bunches of leaves directly under another branch. Finally, we need to consider the shape of the tree itself. It's important to make sure that the leaves don't look like one big blob, but it's also important that they don't look like they're made of spheres. Here, you can see that overall shape consists of different layers and levels of sloping planes that face out and up. Towards the top, however, the shape gets more flat, as the crown is made up of mostly smaller branches that all point up. Just remember that the correct shape is one that maximizes the amount of sunlight the leaves get. And finally, note how there are many gaps in the leaves, as the tree should be 80 or 90% air. Tip number 5 is another useful trick you can use to make the leaves look more realistic. While the leaves will generally be in the sun, some parts of the tree will be more exposed and open than others. In real life, parts of the tree will always be in shadow, and we can use different blocks and leaves to show this. I like to do this quite extensively, and you can use more than just leaf blocks. I like to mix in some moss blocks, wool, green terracotta, and green concrete powder. This adds interest to the leaves by making them not just leaf blocks. Now, I use darker blocks like the green terracotta and spruce leaves on the more recessed leaves, and those closer to the bottom. This is because they will get less light and will show as darker. The shading on real trees is actually quite extreme, and leaves farther back will often be far darker than those in the light. I will also use azalea leaves on the most exposed leaves and those on the very top to highlight them. As a final tip, I would recommend using mostly acacia leaves instead of oak leaves, as the texture blends in more with the rest of the leaves. However, I still mixed in some oak to make it look more interesting. Now, all of these tips are mainly tailored to single custom trees, but trees often come in groups. So, the next 2 tips will both involve how to use trees in forests. This is another area many people get wrong, usually by just putting a lot of the same tree everywhere. Luckily, there are a few easy ways to make your forest look better, and a few key things to consider when making them. But before we get to the last 2 tricks, I would really appreciate it if you considered subscribing. It's completely free for you, and make sure you get all of my new videos, while also allowing me to continue to make these kinds of videos. And with that, let's get back to the video. The 6th tip has to do with the size and shape of trees in a forest. On their own, trees will often grow out far horizontally, but in a forest, this is limited by the other trees. Instead, the only trees with many leaves and branches on their sides will be those on the very edge of the forest, as the sunlight can reach lower parts of the tree. In the forest, most branches will be higher up on the tree and point up, while branches will still come off sideways. It will more resemble a parachute with a rounded top and branches reaching up to a canopy at a higher angle. Also, the trees in a forest will not just have a single shell of leaves, as it will instead be formed of different layers of leaves formed by the lower branches. You can see this on a single version of a tree in a forest I made here. Also remember that trees come in all different sizes. Here, we have some trees that are only a portion of the height of the others, and there is one that is higher than the rest. This is important because it adds some natural variation to your trees and makes the forest look more lifelike. Now, the final tip is to remember that forests do not only have trees. You should also include younger trees, undergrowth, and even occasional fallen trees. Nature is constantly changing, and your forest should reflect that. Here, you can see a fallen tree. Note that fallen trees are often larger, as they will have usually been the oldest trees. Also, make sure your forest has plenty of leaves and bushes. I like to add patches of leaves at different sizes and heights to show all of the bushes and shrubs forests naturally have. Finally, you can always just go outside for inspiration, as trees and forests can be found almost anywhere on Earth. Even if you're in space, you still have internet. And since you do have internet, and if you want to learn more about all of the color theory I briefly went over in this video, feel free to check out my video here, where I went far more in depth into color theory and color mixing. Bye!